Princess Alara sat in her chamber, staring at the tall windows where the light of evening fell across the stone floor. Her heart felt heavy, for she knew the time had come. Her mother, Queen Marielle, had told her that her life was not her own. She was a daughter of the throne, and her choices were bound to duty. Alara had always dreamed of walking free through the gardens, of reading her books without guards at her side, of speaking her mind without fear. But dreams were weak against the will of the crown. All day the palace had been full of movement. Servants carried gowns and jewels, guards filled the hallways, and voices echoed in the great corridors. Alara kept to herself, her hands folded in her lap. She thought of the life that was about to be taken from her. She would soon be married to a man she had never met, a man chosen not for love but for power. She told herself not to cry. A princess could not appear weak, even when her heart was breaking. Queen Marielle entered her room before the ceremony. Her face was firm, her voice steady. She spoke of duty, of peace, of how many lives would be saved if Alara accepted her role. Alara listened in silence, her eyes lowered. She wanted to tell her mother that she was afraid. She wanted to say that she longed for freedom. But the words died in her throat. She had been taught since childhood that duty was greater than desire. Her silence was her only answer. When the queen left, Alara rose and went to the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, dressed in a gown of silver and blue. The fabric was heavy, the jewels cold against her skin. She did not feel like herself anymore. She felt like a figure carved from stone, placed on display for others to judge. She touched her cheek and whispered a small prayer, though she did not know if anyone could hear her. The sound of trumpets filled the air. Outside, the palace square was alive with voices, with banners flying and people gathering to witness the union that would change the kingdom. Alara walked down the long corridor, her steps slow, her breath uneven. Every wall, every torch, every face she passed felt like part of a dream she could not escape. She tried to hold her head high, but inside, she felt like a child again, lost and unsure. Guards opened the great doors to the ceremonial hall. Light poured in, brighter than she expected. Rows of nobles lined the hall, their eyes fixed on her. She walked forward, her hands trembling though she tried to hide it. Whispers followed her steps, voices soft but sharp, speaking of her beauty, her fate, her burden. She wished she could shut them out. She wished she could run, but her path was set. At the front of the hall stood the throne, and beside it the place where her groom would stand. Alara's chest tightened. She did not know his face. His name had been spoken only in passing. She had imagined him as a conqueror, a man of steel and stone, someone who would see her not as a person but as a prize. She tried to prepare her heart for that truth. Yet as she reached the final steps, she felt her breath catch in her throat. The time had come, and there was no turning back. Her mother's voice carried through the hall, announcing her daughter, announcing the bond that would be sealed this night. Alara lowered her gaze, her heart racing, waiting for the moment when the veil would lift, and she would see the face of the man she was to marry. Fear pressed down on her chest, and she prayed her legs would not fail her. The hall was silent, all eyes upon her, as the future stood just beyond her reach. The great hall was filled with light and silence as Princess Alara reached the final steps. Her hands shook inside her gown though she tried to keep her face calm. She could feel hundreds of eyes fixed on her. The nobles leaned forward, the guards stood tall, and the common people in the balcony whispered among themselves. She was about to meet the man who would shape the rest of her life. Her mother spoke the words of tradition, her voice strong and steady, filling the hall. Alara kept her gaze low, waiting. Her heart raced in her chest like a drum. The moment felt endless, stretched by fear and by hope she did not dare to admit. Then the sound of movement broke the stillness. The groom was stepping forward. When the veil was lifted, Alara froze. The breath caught in her throat. The man before her was not a warlord with iron armor or a cruel smile. He was a human man, dressed in simple but fine clothes, his face calm, his eyes steady. His name was spoken to the hall, Ethan Cole. The sound of it spread through the crowd in a wave of whispers. Alara could not move at first. She stared at him, searching for the threat she had expected. But he only stood there, quiet and respectful, waiting for her to meet his eyes. He gave a small bow, not mocking, not forced, but honest. Her heart stung with confusion. This was not what she had prepared herself to face. For a moment she wondered if this was some trick, some cruel game played by the council. But when she looked at her mother, Queen Marielle, the queen's face was calm, her expression unreadable. The queen had known all along. Ilara felt anger rise inside her, but it was mixed with something else she could not name. The ceremony continued, each word heavy with meaning. Ilara's voice shook when she was asked to speak, but she managed to answer as was expected. Ethan spoke too, his voice clear, carrying through the hall. He did not sound proud or cold, sounded steady, like a man who knew the weight of his choice. When his eyes met hers, Ilara felt her chest tighten, as though he saw more than the crown and gown she wore. She looked away, unsettled. The people watched closely. Some looked pleased, others doubtful. But the whispers did not stop. A human man, they said, bound to the princess. Some saw peace in it, others saw danger. Lara tried to shut out their voices, but they echoed in her head as she stood beside Ethan. When the vows were spoken and the hands joined, Ilara felt the warmth of his hand against hers. It was strange, not unwelcome, but strange. He did not grip her hand as if to claim her. He held it gently, firmly, as if to steady her shaking fingers. She glanced at him once, and for a heartbeat she saw no enemy, no stranger, but someone carrying his own silence. The ceremony ended with cheers and the ringing of horns. The hall burst into sound, banners swayed, and the people clapped their hands. Ilara lowered her head, trying to keep her breath calm. Ethan stood tall, but not proud, his gaze moving across the hall without fear. Together they turned and walked down the aisle as husband and wife, though in her heart, Ilara did not yet know what to feel. When the doors closed behind them and the sound of the crowd faded, the air grew quieter. They walked side by side down the corridor. Ilara kept her eyes forward, but she could feel his presence beside her. After a long silence, Ethan spoke in a low voice meant only for her. He said he understood her fear, said he had not come to rule her or to chain her. He'd come because peace was worth sacrifice. His words were soft, but they carried weight. Ilara did not answer. Her throat was too tight, her mind too full. She only walked on, holding his words in her chest. Something in her began to shift, though she did not yet know what it meant. She had been forced into this path, but perhaps the journey ahead would not be what she feared. Still doubt and worry clung to her heart as the night stretched before them. The night was quiet after the ceremony. Torches burned along the palace walls, and the halls were nearly empty. Princess Ilara walked slowly through the corridor, her thoughts heavy. Her gown still carried the weight of the vows, her hand still remembered the touch of Ethan's hand. She felt both trapped and uncertain, as if the ground beneath her feet had changed. Ethan was not far behind her. He kept his steps steady, his face calm, though his eyes carried a sadness he did not try to hide. When they reached the smaller chamber where the queen had told them to rest before the feast, Ilara finally turned to him. Her voice was soft, uneasy. She asked him why he had agreed to this marriage. It was a question that had burned inside her since the moment his name was spoken. He did not answer right away. He looked at the stone wall, then back at her. He said he had lived through battles, that he had seen too much loss. He said he had once fought for glory, but had learned that victory left scars deeper than any wound. When the chance came to bring peace through a bond of marriage, he chose it. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. His words were plain, without pride, but filled with truth. Ilara listened, her heart torn. She wanted to doubt him, to think he was only repeating what the queen had told him to say. But his eyes did not shift, his voice did not tremble. He spoke like a man who had carried pain and had chosen to stand against it. She felt a strange pull in her chest, something she did not want to admit. Later, as the feast began in the grand hall, Ilara sat beside Ethan at the long table. The nobles raised their cups, music filled the air, and laughter rose above the clatter of plates. Yet under the sound of joy, there was unease. She noticed the glances exchanged among council members. Their smiles were too thin, their voices too sharp. She understood then that not everyone wanted this union to succeed. While the guests celebrated, Ilara spoke quietly with Ethan. He told her of his home, of the fields where he grew up, of the friends he lost in war. His words painted pictures of a world both harsh and tender. She found herself listening closely, caught between sorrow and wonder. She shared a little of her own life, of her love for the observatory of the stars that gave her comfort when the palace walls felt like a cage. Ethan listened without judgment, as though her words mattered to him. But shadows grew that night. As the feast went on, Alara caught sight of two men slipping behind the pillars, their eyes cold, their hands hidden in their cloaks. Unease swept through her. She whispered to Ethan, and he followed her gaze. His face hardened, and without a word he stood. Alara's pulse quickened. She realized that the danger was real, that someone wished to end this bond before it could begin. She followed Ethan into the quieter corridor behind the hall. The music faded, replaced by the soft echo of their steps. Then, from the shadows, the two men stepped forward, blades glinting in the torchlight. Alara gasped, her heart pounding. Ethan moved in front of her, his body steady like a shield. He did not hesitate. With swift motion, he disarmed the first man, his movements sharp but controlled. The second lunged, but Ethan struck with precision, sending the blade clattering to the floor. The attackers fled into the darkness, leaving only the sound of Alara's quick breath and Ethan's calm stance. She stared at him, shaken. He turned to her, his eyes gentle again, asking if she was hurt. She shook her head, unable to speak. He told her that this was only the beginning, that there were those who feared what peace might bring. His words filled her with dread, but also with a strange trust. Lay returned to the feast. Alara felt different. She still feared the future, but she no longer saw Ethan as only a stranger. He was more than the groom forced upon her. He was a man who carried pain, who chose peace, and who had stood between her and danger without question. Something deep inside her began to change, though she could not yet name it. The hall welcomed them back with music, but her thoughts stayed on the shadows and on the man who had faced them at her side. The night of the betrothal feast stretched long, and the music never seemed to stop. Yet Princess Alara could not forget the shadow of danger that had passed so close to her. She sat at the high table, smiling when needed, but her mind remained on the attack in the corridor. Ethan sat beside her, calm and watchful, his hand resting near his cup, but his eyes always moving across the room. He was not only a husband forced into her life, he was now her guard, her shield. This truth unsettled her and comforted her at the same time. When the feast ended and the guests left in groups, Alara followed Ethan through the quiet halls. The air smelled of smoke from the torches and of wine spilled on stone floors. The queen had retired earlier, leaving guards at her chamber door, but whispers followed Alara wherever she went. She could hear the doubt in the voices of the nobles. Some called the marriage a mistake. Others spoke of betrayal. Alara knew then that peace was fragile, that enemies were near. Later that night, when the palace grew silent, Alara sat in her chamber, unable to sleep. The window was open to the stars, her only comfort. She remembered Ethan's words, how he had chosen peace not out of weakness, but because he believed it was worth sacrifice. She wondered if she had the same strength. She wondered if her own heart could change from fear to courage. Her thoughts were broken by a sound at the door. Ethan entered quietly, his face serious. He told her that messages had been intercepted, where assassins were hiding in the lower halls, planning to strike again. His voice was low but steady. He said they had to act before the queen herself was placed in danger. Alara's chest tightened. She had never faced such a choice, but she nodded, trusting him. Together, they moved through the dark halls, guided by the faint glow of torches. Ethan walked ahead, his hand near the hilt of a blade he carried at his side. Alara followed close, her heart racing but her steps firm. The palace felt different at night. The walls that once seemed like cages now felt like shadows full of secrets. When they reached the lower hall, they found 3 men gathered, their cloaks drawn, their voices harsh. Alara held her breath as Ethan stepped forward. One of the men drew a weapon, and the fight began. Ethan moved quickly, his strikes precise and sharp. The clash of steel echoed through the hall. Alara pressed her back against the wall, her eyes wide, yet she refused to run. She saw the strength in Ethan's arms, the control in his movements, and the fire in his eyes. He fought not for glory, but to protect. One man fell back, wounded, while another rushed forward. Ethan blocked the strike, then forced the man down with a swift blow. The third turned toward Alara, his face twisted with anger. Her breath froze, but before the man could reach her, Ethan was there. He stood between her and the blade, driving the attacker back with unyielding force. When it was done, the men fled into the night, leaving silence behind. Ilara's hands shook, but she stepped forward, her eyes on Ethan. Eyes. He was breathing hard, his shirt torn, but his gaze was steady. He asked if she was hurt. She shook her head, words lost. She wanted to thank him, but the word felt too small. Instead, she simply stood near him, her fear slowly fading into something else. Respect, trust, something deeper she dared not name. As dawn neared, the truth came to light. The Queen's council gathered, and Ethan revealed what had happened. One noble at the table grew pale, his eyes shifting. Under pressure, the man confessed his part in the plot. He had hoped the marriage would fail, that war would return, giving him power and wealth. His betrayal spread through the court like fire. Guards took him away, his name cursed by those who once trusted him. Ilara stood beside Ethan as the Queen listened in silence. For the first time, Ilara felt her voice rise with strength. She spoke to the council, saying that the marriage was not a chain, but a chance for peace. Her words trembled, but they carried truth. Ethan bowed his head beside her, showing no pride, only quiet agreement. Together they had faced the danger, and together they had stood against it.
Wow.
When the council left, Ilara turned to Ethan. The hall was empty, but the weight of the night still pressed on her. She whispered that she was no longer afraid of him. He gave her a faint smile, not of victory, but of relief. In that moment, she knew the path ahead was still hard, but she also knew she would not walk it alone. The morning after the council meeting, the palace was filled with both relief and unease. Guards patrolled the halls more closely, and the whispers of betrayal had not yet faded. Princess Ilara walked through the gardens, the sun rising gently over the walls. Her heart was heavy, yet also lighter than it had been the day before. For the first time, she felt she had spoken with her own voice, not only as a daughter of the Queen, but as herself. She thought of Ethan and how he had stood beside her, never forcing her, never silencing her. That memory warmed her, even as doubt still lingered. Ethan joined her in the gardens. He did not speak at first, only walked beside her on the stone path. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, said the danger had not passed, but he also said that they had faced it together and survived. He told her that he believed she had more courage than she thought. Ilara looked at him, unsure of what to say. Her heart stirred with something she could not name, a feeling both frightening and gentle. Later that day, the Queen gathered the court once more. She announced that the traitor had been cast out and that order would be restored. She also declared that the marriage would go forward, not only as a symbol of unity, but as a foundation for lasting peace. Many in the court bowed their heads in agreement, though some still whispered. Ilara stood tall beside Ethan, and this time, she did not lower her gaze. She felt stronger, not because she was forced to be, but because she chose it. Preparations for the final ceremony began at once. The palace was filled with color, banners hung from the high towers, and the people gathered in the square. Lara watched the work from her window, her thoughts quiet. She had once dreamed of running away, of escaping the crown and its weight. Now she wondered if freedom was not found in escape, but in choosing how to carry her duty. Ethan's words, his actions, his steady presence, all echoed in her heart. When the day of the wedding arrived, the hall was brighter than before. Flowers lined the walls, the air filled with music. Ilara walked slowly down the long aisle, her gown lighter than the one she had worn before, her steps more steady. The people rose to their feet, their eyes following her. She did not feel like a statue carved from stone this time. She felt alive, aware of every breath, every sound, every step. Ethan stood at the front, waiting. His clothes were simple but noble, his eyes steady. When she reached him, their eyes met, and for the first time Ilara did not look away. She saw in him not a stranger, not a burden, but a man who had chosen to stand with her. Her heart beat fast, but not only from fear. It was from something new, something she was only beginning to understand. The vows were spoken again, but this time the words felt different. When Ilara answered, her voice was clear, her choice her own. When Ethan answered, his words carried the same calm strength as before. When their hands joined, she did not tremble. She felt steady, as though the warmth of his hand gave her strength. The people cheered, the sound rising through the hall like thunder, but she heard only the quiet beat of her heart. After the ceremony, they stepped out onto the balcony together. The crowd in the square below cheered and waved, their voices carrying across the stone walls. Elara lifted her hand in greeting, and beside her, Ethan did the same. For the first time, she did not feel alone on the high balcony. She felt as though the path before her was no longer forced, but chosen. When they returned inside, Elara spoke softly to Ethan. She said she no longer feared the life ahead. She said she believed they could build something good, not only for themselves, but for all who depended on them. Ethan smiled faintly, not in pride but in quiet hope. He said they would face whatever came together. His words eased the last of her fear. That night, as the torches burned and the palace settled into peace, Elara looked out at the stars from her chamber. She had once thought they were distant, untouchable, but now they felt closer, as though she could reach them if she tried. She turned to find Ethan at her side, and for the first time, she smiled without hesitation. The future was still unknown, but she was ready. Together they would walk forward, not as strangers bound by force, but as partners bound by choice.